Okay, how are we doing on volume levels? That doesn't actually sound too bad. I don't think there's too much, a little bit up. There we go, yeah. That's not too much reverb. Okay, so I just found out, Stanley, we need to put Karen Lackey on, mention Karen Lackey in your prayer. Anybody else that we have that, yes ma'am?
I just found out I may possibly have lupus.
You may possibly have lupus, that's not a good thing.
Yes, so
Yeah.
add me on there too.
Okay. Lupus, yeah. My daughter-in-law does, and she fights the balance of medications. So, anyone else? Okay, Stan? Amen. Come on in, y'all. We're in chapter 57 this morning of Isaiah. And 57 is a direct continuation of 56. Probably shouldn't be separated, other than it made for a nice break last week at the end of class. But the subject matter in that, it continues directly. For some reason, I continue to get 56, 57, and 36 and 37 confused. So I'm sitting here reading my notes. It says chapter 57 is a continuation and probably shouldn't be separated from 36. So the first section, I guess it should be taken. Good morning. You're on time this morning. It's good to see you.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
The first part should probably be taken as an encouragement. I think it was probably intended to be a consolation more than anything. So we read 1 and 2. The righteous man perishes, and no man takes it to heart, and devout men are taken away while no one understands. For the righteous man is taken away from evil. He enters into peace. They rest in their beds, each one who walked in his upright way. So the consolation encouragement is that righteous are going to die prematurely, but they're going to their reward, and they're going to a place of peace. because Isaiah's about to spin on his heels real quick. But come here, you sons of a sorceress, offspring of an adulterer and a prostitute. Yeah, Isaiah doesn't mince words. Actually, let's back up a second because I have a couple quotes here that kind of support the first two verses. And just kind of hang on to 3 because we're going to get back to it. And that one's a fun one. Turn to Philippians 1. We see Paul echoing this thought process that Isaiah puts out in verses 1 and 2. Beginning in verse 22. But if I go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. So what shall I choose? I do not know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better indeed, but it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. And then 2 Corinthians. In chapter 5. We are confident then and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So Paul, being a Pharisee and a very excellent scholar of the Old Testament, would have known Isaiah's writings very intimately. And so I believe he's directly referring to this thought process when he echoes these words. And of course, Paul was under constant persecution from the Jews, from everyone. Okay. Any comments there before we get into the fun stuff? All right. Sons of the sorceress, seed of adulterers and whores. There's a couple things that are going on in here. Cambridge actually points out that the most galling insult to the Oriental culture is to revile his mother. Probably not that much less galling than in our culture too, but nonetheless. More likely though, this refers to Jews who were actually schooled in witchcraft and sorcery. Some of the commentators point an allusion to the mixed race of the Samaritans, but in context, I'm not sure that's not more of a generalized accusation of the Jews as a whole that mixed paganism in with their Judaism. In beginning this verse 3, this pointing out of this accusation, but you, this is turning away from any of the leaders. This is going directly to the people. This accusation is being aimed at as the Jews as a whole. And when you consider the verses 3 and 4 together, it just seems to make more sense to that. Against whom do you jest? Against whom do you open wide your mouth and stick out your tongue? Are you not children of rebellion, offspring of deceit? So, and again, in time frame context, Judah had already been carried off to captivity. Jerusalem was all that remained, and they had the Assyrians at their door, knocking at the door, waiting to roll over the top of them. And yet they continued in their idolatry. Isaiah gets into some interesting metaphors here. And they do have some background in them as we go through this. Who inflame yourselves against the oaks under every luxuriant tree, who slaughter the children in the ravines under the clefts of the crags. Okay, that was not a metaphor. That was a practice that a lot of them did in that time frame. And the Jews were doing the practicing. The pulpit commentary holds this time of writing to the Jews caught up in the paganism and mocking the few, including Isaiah, faithful Jews that are left. The phrase used in verse 4 typical of one who derides another. So this is Isaiah fighting back. And he's throwing this out at them. You're standing over here, you're mocking him. Let's back up a second. If we go back through this study Many times we see Isaiah frustrated that he continues to preach the same message time after time, and it's falling on deaf ears. In fact, to the point that they're mocking him for continuing to preach these things. And so that's where this is coming from. Isaiah is fighting back. He's throwing this back at them. I'm sure he understands that the time for their punishment is coming quickly. So, crud. I have here, read printout on child sacrifice, and I didn't bring my printout. Oops. So, verse 5, this is a full frontal attack against the idolatry being practiced at this time to the point of becoming stereotypical in his description. And again, I don't have my printout on child sacrifice. I am really disappointed that I did that. What can I remember from that? If I'm not mistaken, there were priests, Jewish priests, that were actually sacrificing children. This was not just something going on with the pagan cultures around them. And that's what Isaiah is taking note of. Am I right, Jim, in that recollection?
I think so. There's a book out there called Gods of the Jews, and there were Jews worshiping lots of different gods at this point. And so that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. I thought that that's what I remembered reading from that printout. So, okay. I'm deaf and I heard that. Okay. In verse 6, this, among the smooth stones of the ravine is your portion. They are your lot. Even to them that have poured out a libation, you have made a grain offering. Shall I relent concerning these things? One of the many forms of idolatry that the Jews were engaged in, or some of the Jews were engaged in, was to worship smooth stones. Now, this is not something that was new. There's a similar reference to the Phoenicians in Genesis 28. So go ahead and turn there. And while you're turning there, I'm going to make note that this worship of these small stones had elevated itself to a fetish in this time. So, Genesis 28:18. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone that he had placed under his head, and he set it up as a pillar. He poured oil on top of it, and he called the place Bethel, though previously the city had been named Luz. So, there was another thought that's associated with this, that this was another insult that Isaiah was throwing out. That those that practiced idolatry are as featureless and deceitful as, I lost my place, as those that practice this fetish. You had to go there, didn't you? That certainly was an obsession in 80s, 90s, somewhere in there. I don't know that it ever really elevated itself to a fetish, but might have. I had 5 kids. I didn't need any pet rocks. 5 kids, 2, 3 dogs. What else do we have? We had some others: birds, fish, and a ferret. I know, yeah. It was a hard one to get past.
Anybody under 50 didn't get that.
No. I'm not even sure you could find that on YouTube anymore, but what would Isaiah be contrasting? If he's going to call the Jews featureless little round stones that have no distinguishing, what is he contrasting that? Or how is he contrasting that?
It's the uselessness of idols.
The what?
Uselessness of idols.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But what's the contrast?
God's people were supposed to stand out. They were supposed to have features nobody else had.
Yep. That's definitely a large part of it. The other part of it is the direct contrast to God himself. Okay? These featureless, worthless stones that can't talk, can't do anything, just sit there and kind of like pet rock, just sit there against a powerful and active and demonstrative God who has a people, who has made a covenant with his people that are to stand out, that are to be different in the world. And this accusation of being these flat, featureless stones, you're just part of everything else. Probably an object lesson for us in there. But
Isn't all of this, I guess, for lack of a better way of describing it, just bluntly put, the way human nature is? I mean, Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4 about how he has a responsibility to teach and preach the truth, and yet in due time he warns Timothy that the people, talking about members of the Lord's church, will not listen.
yeah,
And sadly, I see a lot of that going on today. People don't want to receive all of the Scripture. They only want to pick and choose what suits them.
yeah,
And this is exactly what Isaiah was dealing with in his time, 700 years BC.
yeah. It's what Abraham and Lot dealt with too, wasn't it? It's what God dealt with in the garden.
I mean, it's what happened 7 generations after creation and during the time of Noah, you name it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sad, but it's the bottom line is, in all of this, is there's a lesson here for us. Don't repeat history.
Yeah,
Will we listen? Will we learn? Will we understand?
yeah. Will we put in the effort to understand? And I think that's the downfall of human nature, is that we're lazy and we don't want to put in that effort, because you got to take time to open this up and read it and study it and challenge yourself and apply it and maintain it. That's work. Good thing we don't have a Sabbath, huh? So yeah, I agree with you, Clayton. It's probably the one downfall of free will, is that we have that freedom to choose not to put in the effort to understand and to follow and to be obedient. Which may have something to do with Paul including children that are disobedient to their parents in with the same group as murderers and thieves, and so. Yeah. Just kind of a side thought over there.
But could these, this is just a question on my part, could these smooth stones also be indicative of a people that everything that Isaiah was telling them, or everything that God was trying to teach them, was just rolling off? It didn't stick. It was, they were unreceptive
Yeah.
to anything and everything that they were being told and given as a way to avert or avoid the inevitable which was coming.
If you picture a stream, yeah, the flat, smooth stones don't create any ripples, do they? Everything just goes right on past. Yeah. Jeremiah 2:27. I think that was in my notes, and I intentionally didn't put it down there. There were a couple references to Jeremiah that I just passed on. Let's see if I can find Jeremiah.
4 or 5 pages.
I was going too far. Thank you. I was thinking in terms of.
You're almost at the end of Isaiah.
Nah. I think that Isaiah is like the 5 baskets of fish. 27. Who say to a tree, "You are my father," and to a stone, "You gave me birth." For they have turned their back to me and not their face, but in the time of their trouble they will say, "Arise and save us." Yeah. Jeremiah is probably echoing Isaiah's thoughts as well. Yeah. And that would have been during a time that they would be in captivity and still ignoring it. How's that for a commentary on people? Okay, and Isaiah continues this and finishes with another verbal assault. And behind the door and the doorpost you have set up your sign. Indeed, far removed from me, you have uncovered yourself and have gone up and made your bed wide, and you've made an agreement for yourselves with them. You have loved their bed and you've looked on their manhood. Look at the beginning of 8. What's the first thing that comes to mind in Isaiah's assault here? Behind the door and the doorpost. The Passover, yeah. Yeah, when they were told to put the blood on the doorposts. Yeah, I think that's part of Isaiah's insult. Now, Cambridge points out that beginning here and going forward, the verb structure changes to a female personification, and indicating, at least their conclusion, is that this is being directed to the people as a whole. Verses 7 and 8 refer directly to the defilement of the marriage bed, and specifically here, the marriage covenant between God and the Jews. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked and get buried into a discussion about marriage and divorce, but I do want to run some parallels here that occurred to me in terms of thought processes. The Jews defiled themselves in idol worship. If we go and we look through some of the references, why did God issue an edict of divorce to the Jews? What was his reasoning? Their hard hearts, but thank you. They were cheating on him. Okay? They were cheating through idol worship and paganism. They were cheating on the covenant that God made with them. Okay? Jeremiah 3. Beginning in verse 8. I gave faithless Israel her certificate of divorce and sent her away because of all of her adulteries. Yet I saw that her unfaithful sister Judah had no fear. She also went out and committed adultery. Because Israel's immorality mattered so little to her, she defiled the land and committed adultery with stone and wood. In spite of all of this, her unfaithful sister Judah did not return to me with all her heart, but only in pretense, declares the Lord. The Lord said to me, faithless Israel is more righteous than unfaithful Judah. Now flip forward to Matthew. Chapter 5. And as you're flipping there, I want you to think, where did the certificate of divorce start for the Jews? Okay? And don't have to be a huge scholar to know that it came from Moses and the law. Okay? But I think the real pretense here is a lot greater than that. So let's look at Matthew 5:31. beginning in 31. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Look at the parallels between the instructions in Matthew and what Isaiah is talking about and what the Jews did with God. When we wonder why this is such a huge issue, it goes back to God's jealousy of his covenant with his bride. Who's his bride today? The church. Okay? So there's a lot there for us to keep in mind and to learn and to impress upon younger people as they get ready to venture into that prison sentence, into marriage. Yeah, good. You're awake. You are paying attention. But seriously, I think that's a large part of the importance of impressing that onto young people as they get ready to get married, is that this whole concept goes back to God's relationship with his people. And if we are the representation of God, it's a direct carryover. Any comments? Again, without getting too far down that particular subject, but just in our context.
Just over the years, I've come to see adultery and idolatry as more and more just the same thing. But this morning, I see some differences in that, idolatry is rebellious. It invites the wrath of God. But adultery hurts God.
Yeah.
Adultery is painful for the victim.
Yeah.
Adultery is disgusting. It's not just, an act of war. It's a personal, very, very personal betrayal.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows the relationship we actually have with God is more intimate than just what idolatry would
Yeah.
instead of a king, is more of a groom.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think when we peel back the layers of the onion, I think that's what we really get to when we get down to this whole topic.
Talking about the rock,
Yeah.
I was just thinking that it indicates it's not about the thing, right? If it's not a rock, it's a cow. If it's not a cow, it's a star. How adulterous the human heart is.
Yeah.
And how we can't deceive ourselves and think, oh, those people are terrible. That same potential lies within us. Just like we have to guard our hearts and protect our relationship with our spouse and not let things creep in to drive us away later. It's the same thing with God. We have to guard our hearts. We have to spend that time with God and maintain that guard. Not because he might drift away, but because our hearts might.
Yeah. Yeah. In the Old Testament, who drifted away? It wasn't God. It was the Jews. And yeah, it is definitely something we need to guard against as well. Yes, sir.
Look at the depth of adultery. You look at two people that God has joined together. God joins them together. And when there's adultery involved, it's a ripping away of the covenant that you made with God. And the destruction there is so great until to me, it's like you violated an oath that you made directly with him.
Mm-hmm.
And the destruction there is so great until it'll follow you all the way to your grave.
Again, I don't want to get too far down that road. I want to stay in context here with the parallel that, and I agree with what you're saying, Josh, but I want to stay in with a parallel with what the Jews did to God and how that echoes across. When we talk about the church being the bride of Christ, when we talk about all of these as being the brother of Christ in heaven and all of these things, I think that's what Isaiah is talking about, and I think there's a real underlying message that's what's in Matthew as well. I don't think that that concept changes. And a focus of it, to me, still comes back to God made this covenant, and he was forced to issue his edict of divorce because of this, because of the paganism, because of the basic cheating on God. And when we go back and we see that, I think that ties right in with passages like God hates divorce. I think all of that goes together, and it comes back to those covenants. Yes, sir.
Does it go back to even before the covenant?
Uh-huh.
The children of Israel. And God looked to man, even repented that he had made man, because he saw that his heart was evil continually.
Yeah.
So for one to guard his heart, knowing that God has pointed out to us and has pretty much broken down what we are. And if we see ourselves through the paradigm that God sees us and walk according to his statutes,
Yeah.
and then only can we glorify him.
Yep.
Because if we leave ourselves to ourselves, we become judges to ourselves. Therefore, we will sin and come against God's law that he set for us to guard us, guard our hearts.
It didn't occur to me to write down the passages or go through the passages, but the number of passages that refer to the bride all through, from Old Testament all the way through, that picture that gets painted there, I think falls right in line with the rest of this, and as descriptive terms for the church. Anything else? Interesting. Let me know if you come back across it.
I know where it is, but I can't think of it right now. I'm gonna let you know if the church does. I know where it is. I have it
Okay.
highlighted in my electronic.
Okay. You highlighted in your electronic?
Yeah, like the Bible app.
Oh, sweet.
Like when I don't have my regular Bible,
No, I get that part. It's the highlighting in there. Does it come off the screen when you with a wipe or? I think, in conclusion of this section, I think that this was a direct assault on the Jewish concept that they would be the chosen people forever and ever. I think Isaiah is foretelling that, and he's warning them that that's what's going to happen. Okay. Oops, how did I get it? Okay, there we go. Verse 9 through 11. You have journeyed to the king with oil and increased your perfumes. You've sent your envoys a great distance and made them to go down to Sheol. You were tired out by the length of your road, yet you did not say it is hopeless. You found renewed strength, therefore you did not faint. Of whom were you worried and fearful when you lied and did not remember me, nor give me a thought? Was I not silent even for a long time so that you do not fear me? If all of the rest of what they did wasn't bad enough, to kind of add insult to injury, they would actually go on pilgrimages to the shrines of these foreign deities, the absolute culmination of their idolatry. And so that's what Isaiah is pointing out here. He's saying you make these long trips and you don't get tired, you stick with it, and you get there. For what? What are you afraid of? These foreign dignitaries or these foreign deities? I want to take a note here, and I want you to again note the ferocity of the language that Isaiah chooses here. Because he is not backing off, and this is not nice stuff, and he's not patting on the back and saying everything will be okay. This is a full frontal assault on their sins and their idolatry and the paganism and everything else that they had reduced themselves. I will declare your righteousness and your deeds, but they will not profit you. When you cry out, let your collection of idols deliver you. But the wind will carry all of them up, and a breath will take them away. But he who takes refuge in me shall inherit the land and shall possess my holy mountain. We see this terminology used repeatedly. Call out your false idols. Call out your false gods. What can they do for you? Make them do something for you. Okay, how many times have we seen that challenge go out? Okay, I am God. Do what you want with these and see if they can match up. Okay? And this is Isaiah doing the same thing again. Yes, ma'am. Matthew 19, 8 and 9. And he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. I'm not sure that that's what Tim was referring. And that falls into getting too far down the road into a whole different study. That's okay. Those are red letter words, by the way, so just so you know, if you have a red letter version. Isaiah's not done. One of the things that Isaiah is referring to in 12 and 13 is that ultimately when they are carried off into captivity, and they've already been told they will be, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will be, and it turns out it was 60 or 70 years later, they will be bearing the burdens of slavery. And under those burdens, let them call to their idols and see if their idols will save them. That's the illusion that Isaiah is putting here. 14 through, through 21, take a change. I'm really surprised we're even going to get this far. I can't. Oh, okay, that makes sense. We've only got a couple minutes. I think we'll hold this section because I think that this section needs to be done in its entirety rather than get it started and break it up.
Do they do cobblestone roads back then?
This would have been before the Romans. I'm sure there were some, but
I mean, just think about that. If you talk about smooth stones, there's a lot of cobblestone roads in Ecuador, and they're not smooth, but they're very durable. But and it's just you just walk on it.
I don't know that there were very many because we're going to get into a section in the last part of this chapter that talks about that indirectly, and if you conclude from what the practice was at the time, I'd have to say there probably weren't very many. They were probably just rough dirt roads that rocks were in the way. So that's based on the practice.
That's the way I see it. I mean, to have a nothing is causing anything to stop them.
Yeah.
The fact that all the teaching that we receive, why is it that so much of it is not sticky? And there's nothing to prevent it from slowing down.
Yeah. I definitely think that's part of the graphic picture that Isaiah is painting there. Is that, again, if you think in terms of a brook, you don't get any ripples in the water with smooth stones on the bed. You get ripples when there's stones protruding up. But if the bed of that brook is all smooth, flat stones, it just runs smooth. And yeah, I think that's exactly the picture that's being painted. Yes, sir.
I don't remember exactly where it is, but in Hosea, God tells him to marry Gomer and to show Israel exactly what they were doing to him as what he did wanted Hosea to show Gomer, even though she was in a whoredom, was to treat her with the most kindness, and even though we are wrong in many of the things that we choose to do, yet God truly loves us.
Yeah.
And he's shown it through that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Stan. I think David's also a good point of that. David was a murderer, an adulterer, a slackard, because when all of that happened with Bathsheba, he should have been out there with his army. And all of those things, he was still considered a man after God's own heart. So I think there's a lot of encouragement in that. Because I would only, aside from the title of king, I would only desire to be like David. Okay. And Paul talks about being a chief sinner. So it's interesting. It's the interesting contradictions. But yeah, the grace of God covers all of that.
But Paul also emphasizes that all sin is forgivable under the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, individually, each one of us
Right.
individually have to be willing to repent. We have to have a penitent heart. That's what made David stand out, because he committed sin. Yes, horrible sin. And yet, when he was confronted with it, he repented.
Yeah.
By the same token, I'm not suggesting that any of us go to those lengths, but we need to realize that when we sin, regardless of what we may think of it, all sin to God is evil.
Yep.
There are no little sins or moderate sin or hard sin. Everything to God is a violation of his law. And it's imperative that we understand that we have to be willing to change. It's not God, it's us. And the only thing that I read about in the scripture that is unforgivable is to call the Spirit of God a liar and deny that the word that has been preserved for our learning is all a lie. It's not the truth.
Yep.
Because that will keep you from obeying.
Yep. Yep. Any last comments? Again, don't hesitate. We're cutting Edward short, so. Yeah. Tim, would you close?
Lord, we thank you that we can come together and learn your word. Help us to apply it to our lives. Remember your word. Bring truth to us. Help us to open our hearts to what Edward's going to bring to us. Help us in our struggles and always be with us. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you all very much.